Great. Hi, Charlotte. It's great to see you. Thanks for joining the podcast.
My pleasure, Jeff. Nice to see you again too.
Fantastic. So for everybody listening, Charlotte Stockwell is a friend of mine, and we're on a volunteer board together that we'll discuss as well as part of the podcast, based in Melbourne, Australia. And it's fantastic that she's agreed to come on Time for a Hand Up as our second guest, and was actually on an earlier discussion, which I started this podcast originally as called the PIN podcast, and I'll explain that in a moment too. But at the end of the day, this discussion and other conversations going forward are all intended to share really authentic stories about people's lived experiences with mental health challenges, people's experiences as caregivers, and also people who have other experiences or who may have services or involved in helping out with people who have faced mental health challenges. So I created this again, having been through different lived experiences myself, believing that, both physical and mental health are very much core intrinsic aspects of being alive for everyone. So, there's no reason that we should stigmatize people who want to regain their health or need help and need to have a hand up to get on the path to becoming healthy again, or as healthy as possible, if they have any form of mental health challenge, just as we completely respect and want to help out anyone with a physical health challenge. So that's the initial background. And Charlotte, again, great to see you. And maybe as we kick it off, if there's a couple of initial words you'd want to say, and then I also wanted to talk a little bit about the organization that we're both involved with. Yeah. So I'll give it over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. All I'll say is that I think the idea of offering a hand up from people who've been there, who are sometimes still there, is actually one of the most positive things that you can do, is to let people know that the experience, they're not on their own, and that there is hope. And that's the most important thing that I hope people listening to this or watching this will come away feeling like there is hope.
Fantastic. And Charlotte, before we get into some of those stories as well, we both have a shared passion for a wonderful sport, and we were fortunate to have gotten to know each other and work together with a wonderful organization. And I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about what we're both involved with.
Well, I've been a tennis nut ever since I was a little girl. My mother sent me off to tennis lessons because she said it would be a useful social skill. Not quite sure how that works out, but it's certainly been a lifelong sport for me. I was wandering the internet looking at tennis related stuff, and I came across this site of kids in Kampala, Uganda, playing tennis really well. I mean, these kids were on a fairly rough ground. Some of them didn't have shoes. Some of them, the rackets looked a little bit big for them. And they were whacking that ball across the net with much more power and precision than I ever had. Anyway, it's a group called Tennis for All Uganda. And essentially, two tennis coaches, professional tennis coaches, decided that they would like to pay back. And they've taken kids from some of the most disadvantaged areas of Kampala, kids who've got, some of them refugee kids from places like Rwanda, but kids who are living in really in poverty, terrible poverty, and so decided to teach them tennis, which was terrific. But not just tennis. Out of that has also come support for their schooling, homework clubs, micro-entrepreneurship groups, learning how to sew, and recently some groups supporting the girls, particularly with what we would call a period dignity, making sure that those kids didn't drop out because they felt embarrassed and couldn't come because they had their periods. And that's been a particular little niche of that group that I've been interested in lately, and helping those girls. And after COVID, being able to help those families again with tiny bits of money so that they can re-establish themselves and get some money back into their own pockets and not be quite so poor. And the kids are amazing. Julius and name has left me. Vincent are fabulous guys, and they've been doing this now for about 4 years, Jeff.
Yeah, even longer, I think. I think it's
Or
about
longer.
9. Yeah.
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 Okay, right, that's right. And their stories too are fantastic. So it's a lot. It's direct. It's hands-on. You all of the support they goes directly into community of those children, and gives me a great sense of I don't know, pleasure that the little that I can do actually has a huge benefit in places like Kampala.
Yeah, no, fantastic. No, I'm really grateful for everything they do, and fantastic to meet you and other wonderful people through the organization. So, and getting back to our overall topic today, I know that you throughout your career have done many things and had many leadership roles, and you're also very involved in mental health issues. And I believe now you're involved with a tribunal in Australia. And maybe there's a few things you'd like to share about what you're doing, and how that tribunal is trying to be helpful to people facing different challenges.
I sit on the Mental Health Tribunal of Victoria. It's as a community member. So we sit in groups of 3. There's always a lawyer who usually presides over the hearing, and a psychiatrist or a doctor, and a community member. And I sit on that panel because I have lived experience myself, and because I've also professionally been involved in efforts to reform the system. So these are situations where somebody has either been brought into hospital on an assessment order because people think they're so sick that they are a risk to themselves and that they won't accept treatment voluntarily. And they have to come before us if they're still in hospital. So, and we make the decision about whether or not, for instance, they have to stay in hospital, or they can be a voluntary patient. And if a voluntary, they can stay in hospital or they can go home, whatever they want to do. And the same thing for people in the community. We make decisions about whether or not a person who is at home must receive treatment. And usually that means some form of medication as well as other forms of treatment. It's a very big thing to take away someone's rights. And that includes their rights to decide what goes into their body. And it includes where they can go, their liberty. Can they leave a hospital ward or not? So it's a legal process to make sure that those rights are being respected and that we are treating that person with dignity. So I sit on that about 3 times a fortnight. And I'm also now on the Tribunal's Governance Committee. So I'm one of the members with lived experience. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to use that again to support other members, whether they be in community or psychiatry or the legal sectors, with lived experience on the tribunal as well.
That's wonderful. And I wanted to explore the lived experience involvement more, because being someone as well who's had, a lived experience and hospitalized for over 5 weeks, I think I can see very well, I believe, how the voices of people, especially trying to reassure, as you've done at the outset, and as I'm hoping to do, for anybody who may be listening, who is really feeling pinned now and suffering, that the lived experiences of trying to provide the hand up and letting them know that others have been there, and others have with the help of others and medication, etc., in different circumstances have gone through it and been able to come out the other side, hopefully with a better life, or to deal with things as they go. So I wanted to ask you a bit more about your thoughts about engaging people with lived experiences, in all sorts of aspects to do with care.
Sure. I guess I can best do that by talking about a hearing, with obviously without naming anybody.
Yes.
It was a hearing for a young man who was 17. He was there with his mum, and he'd been very ill, and he'd been taken to hospital, and then he'd run away from hospital, as people sometimes do. And we decided he was going to stay on an order because he was 17. It's only very short duration. And at the end of the hearing, with the consent of my other tribunal members, I said to him, I wish that I could kind of reach my hand down the generations and pull him through, because I had been his age the first time I was hospitalised, albeit not in a youth facility because they didn't have them when I was 17, but in the public adult system. And that what I wanted to say to him was, it's really hard, and you will feel, no doubt, that your life has suddenly been diverted in a really horrible way, that you're losing all of the things that you expected to be doing or thought your other friends are doing. And what I wanted to say was, that you can understand feeling that way. And nonetheless, not that it's been easy, and I've had other periods of hospitalisation throughout my life, but nonetheless that I've travelled. I've had great relationships. I'm in a very happy relationship now. It's been, going on for 18 years. I have held meaningful work. I've held senior positions in my work. I have friends. And what I really wanted to say to him, and I hope he heard it, and I think he did, and certainly his mum did, was this: your life isn't over because you've had this intense experience of mental illness. It's okay. You will need some advice about finding the right person to work with as a therapist, and learning who to trust and how to trust. But that life isn't over just because you have a mental illness. In fact, in some ways, I think I wouldn't say life's better because that's not right, but I think it certainly made me a kinder person when it comes to dealing with other people who have different kinds of mental illness from the one I've had, whether that be in my workplace, in my friendship group, or in my relationships, that I can come from a place of empathy. And that's a strength.
You mentioned that when you were that age, there was not a youth and so can you talk about that a bit? Like, do you think that is a big improvement now to have the organizations that can focus on that cohort versus bringing a young person into an adult world?
Look, I think the most important thing is if somebody is young, that first experience of mental illness will shape the way they view the mental health system and they view mental health treatment. And we want it to be a positive one. We want it to be one where they feel that they have been heard and they have been helped, and that they can trust certain people. I was in fact talking to some tribunal members only on Friday, because I was sitting on the tribunal then, about how hard sometimes the transition can be from youth services into adult services. Youth services are funded better. You've got more people. You've got a wider range of social supports, and they can drop away in the adult system. So it's really important that what I don't want to see is people getting into the mental health system, particularly the public system, and becoming their career, if you like. Mm-hmm. Becoming so damaged that they don't see a life outside of being in hospital, not being in hospital, being in hospital, not being in hospital. And if we can, for me, somebody said what the systems sometimes want is bed, medication and rest for someone who's unwell. And what we say as consumers is you want a home, you want relationships, and you want meaning.
Yes, right. Wonderful. Wonderful.
And that's the critical thing in providing effective treatment, particularly for young people.
Right. Very, very, very human oriented.
Yeah.
What I wanted to ask you, and just go to the topic of stigma for a moment, and get your thoughts on how society is evolving. And you're in Australia, I'm in Canada, so it could be different depending on where you live in the world, etc. But are you optimistic, and do you feel that society by and large has come a long way over the years in terms, or does it also depend on the age group you're talking about in terms of stigma?
I think it definitely depends on age group. I think huge improvements have been made. I think it's particularly useful when very high profile people talk about their mental health challenges. I think Naomi Osaka, for instance, has been extremely brave and in talking about what's going on there, and that helps. I think it's a little bit sad that we still see it as brave. And I'm looking forward to the day when somebody can say, yes, my depression and anxiety means I need to take 2 months off in the same way that a person says, I'm recovering from my ACL surgery on my knee.
Yes.
You know,
right.
that it's just the same. Like, you know, I'm going to be off the circuit now for 2 months while my knee recovers or while my brain recovers, whatever it is. So stigma is still real. I found it really interesting. Just recently, we had what we call a twilight seminar with the tribunal, and it's all these days having to be done in virtual platforms like Zoom. And a number of people said they thought I was brave, and I was a little bit disappointed to hear that, to be honest, because I don't think, what I would like to think is that being open about your history is nothing, it doesn't require courage. Maybe I'm lucky, I'm not, you know, I'm working for the tribunal, it's the only job I have. I'm not looking for other work because I'm now in my 60s. So I'm not dependent on somebody else's opinion of me as to whether or not I get work. I do admit that I think it's difficult in the workplace. I have had people ask for advice, should they let their bosses know that they have, for instance, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, whatever. And I usually say, wait, just wait. You're not sick now, so that's okay. And secondly, you need to work out what your organisational culture is. You need to work out what the HR practices are.
Right.
You need to know how much you can trust your boss.
Yes. Right.
And just be a little bit careful before you decide to disclose. That's my advice to people, unless they're unwell. And if they're unwell, then I said, okay, this is how I would suggest you talk to to people, and that's about, I'm unwell and this is my recovery plan.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not talking about, and don't talk about your illness in the sense, in the details of it, but this is what I need in order to recover. In the same way that I would if I had 2 broken legs, or I had cancer, or I've just been diagnosed with diabetes and we haven't got it under control yet. Mm-hmm. It should be no different. But you talk about what your treatment plan is and what your recovery plan is and what you will need from the organisation in order to return to work successfully. The other element of stigma that I think we need to address is our own. And I think, you know, I did a seminar with a group called VIMIAC, which is a peak body for consumers in Victoria, about stigma and about the extent to which we internalise stigma, and that sometimes we come with our own sense of shame.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, especially when someone's been, when we've been quite unwell, there are things that we have felt or said or done that in retrospect, we are not happy about.
Yes.
And we've also internalized the stigma that society still holds to an extent about a person with mental illness. I'll give you an example of it's kind of silly stuff that can happen. I had a senior member of staff at an organisation I worked for full-time approached to see if I was all right. You know, Charlotte, are you okay? Because they knew I'd had some issues. Because somebody had reported to them that I had been seen talking to someone who wasn't there. And so they were worried, was I hearing voices? Well, yes, I was talking to someone who wasn't there on my phone, which was in my pocket, through my hearing aids.
Yeah, right. I believe, yeah, I know. It's funny, these days, there's a lot of that. You can assume, and somebody is just speaking through their Bluetooth or whatever it would be.
Right.
Amazing.
So we all had a good laugh, and I said, thank you for approaching me privately and so kindly. That's all good. Right. But no. Right. So you know, people can mean well, but sometimes they're operating off some pretty old stereotypes and cliches.
Well, I decided to post the article that I wrote for Concussion Legacy Foundation Canada on LinkedIn earlier this year, right? And so I thought that's really putting it out there. But I just thought, if I'm going to be somebody who is trying to fight the stigma and make a strong case, then I can't be afraid of it myself. And I had like 3,000 people saw it. So obviously a lot of people saw it, and different comments from different people, which I really appreciated. And there was one gentleman who I will interview on the podcast, but he is like an 18-year veteran of the Canadian military, was in special forces, served overseas. and had some, blunt head trauma and was discharged and has suffered from a variety of, anxiety and depression, et cetera, but is a very successful businessman nevertheless. And, he said that he couldn't come on now because he wouldn't be able to keep it together. Like in the discussion, he's too raw. And he's saying there's all sorts of, there's big questions in the military, et cetera, with all of this too, because obviously you have to be a very tough individual. But he agreed, like, as I've explained to you, and, people listening to this particular podcast may not have heard it, although they may have read it in what I wrote, but I just have the simple analogy of using a bench press with the lightest weight, and to lift 45 pounds, even the strongest man or woman in the world eventually reaches a breaking point, and it doesn't take that long and can no longer lift it off without help. And so, at that point, you just think of somebody who is dealing with issues that you're not. And I'm not saying you, I'm saying obviously anybody who's not suffering from a mental health issue. If that person, they realize when they're pinned, how would they be in real life if they were diagnosed as being bipolar? Their lives would be turned upside down, or they would have some real struggles. And otherwise, if there were major traumas that happen in their life through no fault of their own, whether it is the loss of a partner, or the loss of a child, or a bankruptcy, or something very, very intense, that really disrupts somebody's life and can very legitimately lead to depression and anxiety, et cetera. It's when it's like when they actually experience that, then they can empathize, or they would realize at that point. So again, that this simple analogy of, there, it's almost there, but for the grace of God go I. And it's almost like people who eventually feel the weight of the world on themselves, whether it's too many burdens or too many fires. And so again, I put it out there on LinkedIn because I want to make those points, because if we can all, like you said at the outset, if we can all fight together towards respecting our shared humanity and human dignity, that if people need a hand up, then they should be, in not blocked by shame or stigma from trying their best to get help.
I think the analogy that works for me, I think pinned works really well. I sometimes say that it's like asking a person with 2 broken legs to get up and run a marathon. It's, it just doesn't, you can't. You need all sorts of things in order to recover. You may eventually, and you may have been a marathon runner before, and you may go back to running marathons, but you can't until you've healed, until you've recovered your strength. And that's the other thing is when, if you are working with as in professionally, or someone who's, in your own family, holding space for that person so that they are safe, but also respectful to understand what's going on. My brother also has bipolar disorder, and there are times when my sister and I have been. He's my big brother. He's 15 years older than I am. He still treats me like I'm 6. But every now and then, my older sister and I, we go, right, he's not okay. And we know the signs and symptoms, we know what works, we know what doesn't, and we then become bossy and intervene, and because he lives on his own, we'll put strategies in place to get him back to his best functioning self. And it's done with love.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's, he drives me mad. He seriously does, because he still literally sees me as if I'm 6. And it's families. What can I say?
Sure. No, it happens in all families.
It happens in all families. But that notion of, okay, well, it is what it is, and so we live with it. I accept that. Well, that's part of the deal.
I find the concept of self-talk very interesting, and how when somebody is depressed or has severe anxiety or is suffering from other mental health issues, that their self-talk can also, bring them down further, or just it creates the heavier load because they're not helping themselves to get up, and they need help otherwise. And
Yeah.
and so I think it's interesting. And I think we spoke about this last time, and there are some speakers who really focus on this, but you, I believe, and myself, and pretty much every human being, if you were speaking to a friend in need, you would try to help them, and you would be trying to be uplifting. You wouldn't be critical. You wouldn't
No.
engage in the type of self-talk that you may engage with yourself, ironically, but
Terrible. With depression, for instance, the feeling that you are a burden, that you are making life worse for other people. And the worst thing, of course, is if it drifts into they would be better off without me. And then that drifts into the suicidal space, which I've been in. Then obviously we need to wrap other services around them. It's really important, I think, though, to say to people in that space is that it's very hard for you at that moment to recognize that you are not thinking rationally. This is the illness talking. And you may need other people to make decisions for you while you're in this space because you can't. And it's not a failure. It's just that the illness is roaring. And until we can get that sense of overwhelm down to something more manageable, or we can push it further away, you need to be taken care of. And it should be taking great care. And also, when I'm in the worst space, I know that eventually it will go, but my fear is that it won't. And it feels like it's forever.
Yes, right. Absolutely.
And endless and hopeless, and I'm never going to be well again. Even though the rational part of my mind says, you've been here before, you know this, you will eventually. But it's that dichotomy in the way you're thinking at the time. And again, if you can find someone to trust, and it's more than just a therapist. I think you do need a good therapeutic relationship, but you also have to have people around you. It can be your partner, but sometimes that's hard, or somebody else that you can actually be honest with. And also, if you are the person who's providing support, what I would say to those people is you don't have to do anything except be there. You don't, if you can encourage someone to come for a gentle walk with you, that's great. But don't expect somebody who's in the midst of the worst depression of their lives to come for a brisk walk with you. That's like asking them to do the marathon backwards with broken legs. Sometimes, just to explain that, sometimes feeling like I should have a shower. I haven't had a shower in 2 days. I should have a shower. I can't. That can feel overwhelming. Just that act of getting up and being clean can be too much. But what you can do is sit with someone. You can hold their hand. You can hold them when they cry if they want that kind of comfort. You can encourage someone to eat healthily, even if it's only just a little bit. Because food, I think, I'm a cook. I love cooking. I think good food is also part of encouraging someone towards life, particularly if someone's lost their appetite. And your kindness, and you don't have to fix it. If you're with someone who's in the midst of depression, it's not your job to fix it. You just sit alongside, be with the person. Distraction is fine. Watch a silly movie. At my worst, I watched all of the James Bond movies in order. They didn't require an awful lot of active thought. And they were silly. And I didn't have to concentrate because my concentration was lousy.
Yep.
They can come in and out of a James Bond movie without worrying too much. For somebody else, it might be some music. It might be watching a lousy television series. he might be doing three of those at once. I don't know. But yeah, to those who are caring, the other thing I would say is find someone who can take care of you. Find someone that you can talk to about what it's like for you being the carer of a person who at the moment is very unwell. I think that's the case, whether it be mental illness or physical illness, that the person who's in the primary caring role also needs support.
Yes, right. Do you think I love animals, but I don't have pets. And do you see pets as sometimes or often being a wonderful support?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's nothing like I've got 2 cats. In fact, I thought for a moment my cat Harry was going to come and walk across the keyboard. So we have 2 cats, Harry and Rufus, and I have a rescue dog called Dolly who's downstairs. And they don't judge.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
They don't judge you. Harry will come and sit on my chest when I'm lying in bed. And sometimes that's a bit unnerving when either his face is right up here or his rear
Right.
end, you know.
Right.
Not sure I want a cat's bum in my face.
Right.
But either of them sitting up on the sofa will come and sit on my lap, sometimes both of them. And there is something incredibly healing in having that absolutely unconditional love.
Yes.
And of course, with a dog, you know, she's like, come on, walk me. You need to. So I'm not doing it for me, I'm doing it for her.
Right.
And, you know, that's such a lovely thing to have. So I'm lucky I'm not allergic to animals and I like them.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to go back for a second, and I don't know if there's an example or that you might want to share, but if you look back on the challenges that you had at different times, or one of those times, I mean, can you see things that you would have done differently, or ideally some of the people around you could have done differently had they been aware?
Some things, yes. I think learning for me what the early warning signs are. I wish I'd learned them a bit earlier. And I wish I'd learned the art of mindful meditation earlier. That's certainly been a really useful practice in helping me just step back a little bit from my thoughts, to see my thoughts as separate from me, particularly when those thoughts are distressing. And that being able to self-soothe in that sense. I think there are other things around finding the right therapist, which are really important. I had the wrong one for some time and harm came from that. And I didn't know how to leave the relationship. That's my dog going now. Thanks, Dolly. Keeping the burglars off. There's probably another dog walking down across the street.
Well, I wanted to tell you that actually a person I spoke to this week who's agreed to be on the podcast sometime in the new year is somebody who's had some lived experiences and has created a business that is about finding the right therapist and having an app to do that and trying to line people up, because he said that, and his family, different people in his family have had lived experiences. And he said that has been a big problem for some of them, because you go down a path that is not getting you towards healing if you're not in sync with the person, and if they're not empathetic enough, etc. So his whole business is being built up around that. And again, on the podcast, I would like to have, because, you know, people who have had the lived experiences themselves, caregivers, or people with different ideas, because the hand up is not a cure at all. It's the start of a process, a long journey, or it's like a help on that bumpy journey, hopefully. So I'm looking forward to giving, you know, him exposure for what he and his wife are building, which is touching on the issue that you're mentioning.
Yeah, I did eventually find the right therapist. Fabulous person. A few years ago, though, unfortunately, she very suddenly died.
Sorry.
Which was devastating. This is, you know, somebody who'd actually helped me navigate for myself, you know, so empowerment for myself and all the right things. But be that as it may, as much as I miss Karen, and I do, she was absolutely fantastic. It's matching the right person for you. And if they're not the right person for you, you don't have to apologize. Go find someone else. And I love the idea of a service saying, okay, what kind of thing are you looking for in a therapist? Are you looking for a particular kind of therapy? Because, for instance, some people do cognitive behavioral therapy. Some people will do this thing called EMDR. Some people will practice mindful meditation. Some people come from a Jungian therapeutic psychotherapy, psychoanalysis point of view. And what's right for you? I don't know what's right for you. All I do know is that you may need to try a few out before you find the person who can actually help you get back to the right state of mind.
Looks like your dog wants to join the conversation. Which is fine. When I mentioned pets before, I think he realized it was his turn or her turn. So
yeah, Dolly's my she's an anxious dog. So she's on medication. It made a huge difference. Okay. And I saw a dog behavioralist, a specialist vet, and she gave me some really good advice, and it applies to human beings as well, which is, okay, you've got a dog who's had trauma, terrified of men, especially men wearing baseball caps and sunglasses, absolutely terrified of trucks, wets herself, runs away if she sees a truck. So guess what? I don't put her in situations where she's going to be triggered.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, look, we've had another, very interesting and varied conversation, and hopefully, again, many of the stories that you've shared and that we've discussed together are helpful and interesting to people who are feeling, somewhat pinned or feeling that they're in a tough spot. And this is, trying to, again, share some hope and a hand up from people who have had lived experiences that, there are better days ahead, and there's no shame to reach out when you do need help. And so I wanted to ask you if there's anything else you'd like to say or bring up, or we can keep talking for a little bit as well if you'd like. But I'm just appreciate your time again, Charlotte, and everything that you've been willing to share. But if there's anything else you want to mention, then yeah.
I need to say thank you, Jeff. I think starting up the podcast is a fantastic thing to do. I think sharing the experiences of people, especially when most people when they meet you and me are going to think, well, been successful, got marriages, kids, all those sorts of things. Damn that dog. And there is always hope.
Yes, right.
And recovery happens.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Charlotte. Take care of yourself.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.